we have, in a sense, in this Gospel, the culmination of the Sermon on the Mount, for the Lord sums up in one saying all that he has been saying throughout. Whatever you wish that men would do to you, do so to them, for this is the law and the prophets. The thinker Confucius, who influenced greatly the Chinese culture, had this saying in reverse. The Lord is the only one in history that we have in the positive saying this as a bottom line. He also goes on to indicate that the way of salvation is not something to be taken lightly or for granted. Enter by the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the way is easy that leads to destruction, and those who enter by it are many. Those of you who have been to Medjugorje will have picked up that Our Lady, we are told, is reported to have said that souls are dropping into hell like snowflakes to the ground. That vision of things which heaven has and which we cannot see is something which makes the hairs of our souls stand on end. Snowflakes are very numerous and souls are immortal. So if they're going into the beyond in that state and going down rather than up, it is actually deeply disturbing. For the gate is narrow and the way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few. This issue of the number and the proportion of the saved is something which has been, and I suppose ever will be, discussed. We have authors, preachers in the past who have, with some insistence, underlined the fact that it is actually the majority that are dying unprepared and therefore facing the consequences. We do not know whether it is the majority or the minority. All we do know is that we have the right to observe. And we see that the majority are not thinking about the issue, therefore they're not in a good place. One actually sees how even in this Catholic land, in a small amount of time, the proportion has shifted from the huge majority to the tiny minority, those who are really taking the beyond seriously. And strangely enough, even across the water in Britain, not that long ago, just before we were born, those who had been through the war, and then our grandparents who had been in the period of the First World War, were very much aware of the beyond, because they'd had to face it. And there were days of prayer in neutral England. And then in the First World War, where a very high proportion of those who were engaged, that is the soldiery and not the civil population, were taken very seriously at the beyond. And so, when it comes to our situation, where we have an easy time, not obliged to think in any way about the beyond, the danger is that we actually don't. In the First World War, the chaplain was very important. We know of stories of real heroic virtue of chaplains who would be jumping the trenches to anoint dying soldiers. The chaplain was actually sometimes miraculously preserved. We know that from testimonies. He was so precious that the Lord would not let him be shot. And the case of, by now, blessed if not saint, Daniel Brottier, for instance, who was sent by his bishop to the trenches as a chaplain, even the soldiers remarked that each time, even in the heat of fire, the bullets would actually go around him. It was so important that his presence be there when these soldiers were going on in atrocious circumstances. One day, not that long ago, we were in the area of the trenches, feast that saint there who's in the picture, St. John Roberts, and because another person from the same town had been killed in the war, one of the greatest poets of Wales. That area there was full of living memory, even the names of the parts of the battlefield that they had transmitted even to posterity. That, for instance, over there was Hell Corner and so on. And it was basically, in a very short time, a very high proportion of immortal souls going all together in one fell swoop into the beyond. And therefore heaven is very much involved with that situation. And we know also from testimony, I actually heard it from my father as well, he knew about it, that things sometimes happened. I remember him saying in his natural Welsh there, oh yeah, yes, died in 2 men or whatever on the clouds. In other words, there were strange things happening, angels, and that's gone down in history as the angel of Mons, or Mons, Angelion Mons in Welsh. In other words, these soldiers sometimes were very much touching heaven. And all that to say that therefore, when we bring that down to our situation where we're handling all the time souls who are, even though not right now, but nevertheless potentially right now, in that state of going into the beyond, we're talking about anything and everything but what matters. Now we're offering this Holy Mass for a person who is perhaps in his last times on earth suffering greatly from cancer, but at least we are surrounding him. That is the correct way. All the rest can wait, and especially when it comes to palliative care, it's good that we make the person comfortable, but the real care at these times is the care of what is going to go on. And we are, every moment of our life that we are with another human being before another eternity. And the chances are that very often that person is actually in that state of eternal risk. What do we do? Do we just talk about football? Do we talk about the weather? Do we just crack jokes? Well, what I would suggest is this. One does make contact on that level, yes. But the problem is we have to think twice before spending entire conversations on that level, because it's time and it's also opportunity not being used. We have to know how to get into a conversation and orientate it. I remember one time when I was in the monastery in Italy, because I was guest master, I had a lot to do with the young people who might be coming on retreat, or in groups of people on retreat, or sort of retreat, to our monastery. And we had regularly groups of young people, and one group came every year. It was a group of girls who were ex-drug addicts. They were getting out of it, or they had got out of it, we hope. And therefore, what does one do? Well, it's precisely the other thing which is the important starting point. One finds common territory. Now, transpose this to your own realm, because it's applicable to any conversation. But I remember having this group of young people, what does one do to get through to them from where they're coming? So what I thought, strangely enough, right throughout Europe, there is a common denominator. It is the fact that all these people would have grown up in the same era of the same music. And right across Europe, certain songs are known to all. So that was a good starting point. The Beatles, and they knew them. So singing, I remember at one point a duet with this girl who knew, I think it was the melody better, and I knew the words better. We got it anyway, but it was a great starting point. And from then, once you've got communication and confidence, then you can really get into them, because you've joined them and you're on side. And it's very important, but it mustn't remain at that level. That's the problem. And much youth ministry or much ministry of any sort is remaining sort of on that level. It's not enough just to be present to them. It must be then elevated and orientated and specified and made in some way specifically Christian. Otherwise, we're again wasting precious time. And often one wonders whether a lot of hugely important time, even by priests and sisters and whatnot, is being placed really in what is actually only a lay activity. Anyone can play a game. It has to go further. I remember actually when a child, we were being sent on an annual basis to places where we would be obliged to speak Welsh, but it was very much a Christian camp that we were involved in those years, and it was presumed that it was part of the parcel that there would be prayers in the course of the week and every day and so on. It was part of the system, and therefore that enters into the norm. So if we have to do for any length of time with people, let them somehow enter into our mode in the measure in which it is possible. We don't have to be shy of certain things. It sometimes actually challenges them. I remember being pleasantly surprised more than once by just making the sign of the cross under different circumstances, even on the continent, and people, wow, wake up to that and open up to you out of the blue just because you made the sign of the cross before eating. It's no big spectacular thing, but it actually is a presence. It's a placing present in life, the Lord and his rights. He's actually normally there, not something to be put in a corner. And as I say, then it can be an opportunity, because the Lord has no lips but ours, and he wants us sometimes to say a word in his name. Never a word to aggress, but people actually secretly sometimes do want to know. And when we find that minimal point, then we can actually give. It's no use at all going into a situation where the person does not want to know. That only increases the problem and we lose peace. But there are others, and quite a few, who actually do want to know. And they are quite glad, but they must make the first move then. But don't be shy. Don't put God completely in a compartment. He is our God, and sometimes actually he wants us to speak in his name. So that's enough for now, but remember, the gate is narrow and the way is hard, and it's actually, unfortunately, a common error now to say when a person dies he's gone to a better place. Well, let's hope so, but we have the right to say it. We don't actually know. And if we say the equivalent, for instance, in the funeral ceremony itself, it can be actually the most damaging thing that we can do from the point of view of the soul itself. Because it's depriving that soul of the very thing that it needs, perhaps, that point, prayer. When they say things like, it's time now for him to pray for us, well, it might not be. We have to be very careful before placing ourselves in the Lord's judgment seat, whether for good or for bad. God alone knows. So, life and death are of cosmic importance. As we now pray for this soul who is about to go into the beyond, perhaps, we surround him with prayer, and remember that this last moment is a moment in which all the forces of heaven and hell are engaged in hand-to-hand combat. Satan is there saying, he's mine, and the good angel on the other side, don't worry about it, we've got him safe. But the last push, perhaps, can be ours. Om Vikare